Doing some myth busting about what it's like to work with a grant consultant, an NIH grant consultant. And obviously, I can only speak to clients' experiences working with us, but I think that that can help you figure out a little bit about what it is you might want to look for or why you might consider working or not working with a grant consultant on your next grant. So, if you're new around here, my name is Sarah Dobson. I am a research grant consultant, and my team and I help early career researchers get funded at NIH. So, let's talk about some of those misconceptions about what it's like to work with an NIH grant consultant. And so, I think the first misconception I want to talk about is this um, idea around selling your research, right? So a lot of potential or prospective clients come to us and say, I need help selling my research idea. That's the missing piece. And that is that is a way to frame it for sure. But I think where a lot of people might get confused or they might misunderstand what that actually means is that selling the idea is really just about making it sound better, right? That all you really need to be doing is making the idea sound better by doing a little bit of editing to really sell the idea, right? But what I think is actually going on and what we actually do with our clients is we end up sort of restructuring the entire application so that it is clearer and easier for the reader to grasp, right? And the reader, of course, that's your reviewers, those are your assigned reviewers. And so that is what actually helps sell the idea because you're making it easier for them to understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So it's less about selling the idea itself because the idea already needs to be strong. It's about how you present it and how you communicate the value of that idea in a way that is clear and logical and persuasive. So it's not just about making your sentences sound prettier, it's actually about how you organize the way that you communicate about your research. And of course, a lot of that you can do on your own because NIH gives you guidelines around how to structure your application. But within that overarching structure, we end up doing a lot of shifting things around and reorganizing to make it even clearer and more persuasive. And the reason that our clients find that so helpful is because we can see things that they don't see because they're so immersed in the application, right? You've read it a dozen times already, and so your brain just kind of skips over things that as a first time reader you pick up right away. So even just having a new set of eyes on your application to read it for the first time and say, this isn't coming through, or this doesn't really make sense the way it's organized, that can bring a lot of clarity to what it is you actually need to explain in what order. So again, it's not really about just selling the idea and making it sound better. It's about how you present the information in a clear and logical and persuasive way. So that's number one misconception. Number two is that working with a grant consultant makes the grant writing process easier. So this one, yes and no, right? So I would say working with us, some parts of the grant writing process are easier, but some parts are actually way harder. So what is easier is that you have a bit more built-in accountability, right? Because not only do you need to get your grant written and submitted to your institution or directly to NIH, there's an extra layer of accountability when you work with us because you need to get us your grant in enough time for us to review it and for you to incorporate the feedback, right? So our process takes a good 10, 12 weeks prior to the NIH deadline to really do a thorough job. And so having that extra accountability and those additional deadlines can really make the process easier for you, especially if you're someone who responds well to external pressures, let's say, right? But that, conversely does make it more challenging because if you don't get us your documents on time, we can't do our jobs. And so you miss the opportunity to get those documents reviewed, right? So it makes it harder in the sense of, if you're struggling with time management, that means that it can be much harder to actually get the support that you need, because you might not be able to get those documents in on time, right? So it's easier and it's harder. Another way that working with us might make the grant writing process harder is that we dive deep, right? We take a thorough look at your documents, and we send you back usually a lot of feedback, a lot of questions in the margins of your document, right? So those questions are questions you really have to think about to be able to respond to and answer well. And so that requires a lot of time and space to really think that through. And sometimes, communicate with the other members of your research team. But it really does require an extra layer of thinking and organization to be able to do that. So in that way, it could be perceived as actually being harder. But what I will say more broadly is that working with us anyway, and of course it might look different working with a different grant consultant or editor, is that working with us is it's a real investment of time and energy, right? It's a lot. It's a rigorous process that we expect you, and in fact require you to follow. But the promise on the other end of that is a fundable score on your application, right? And so, in our view, of course, it's totally worth it to make that investment of time and energy and money, of course, right? But it's really important to know that coming in, that this is not just handing your grant over to us and twiddling your thumbs for 2 weeks while we look at it, right? This is it's a really rigorous process. We really put you through your paces, but the end result is something you can be really, really proud of, and you'll be able to take forward and actually do that research. And the time from the initial idea to actually getting it funded can be shortened when you work with a team like us, right? So it may be painful or challenging in the short term, but in the longer term, a lot of our clients find it's totally worth it, right? So just remember that misconception that it's not necessarily easier. It doesn't necessarily make the grant writing process easier, but it does make the process, I think, more more fulfilling, let's say, in the end. But what it also can do for you is help you really understand the type of thinking that is required and the type of communication that is required to be successful with your NIH grant. So the next time you know better what you need to do in advance, right? Whether or not you work with a grant consultant on an ongoing basis. Okay, so that's number two. Number three is just that question about whether it's actually worth it to work with a grant consultant or editor. And so you might think it's not actually worth it because ultimately working with a grant consultant or getting your grant funded actually comes down to having a great research idea. And so it might not be worth it to work with somebody because it's really just about the quality of the idea. Or if you're really cynical, it just comes down to luck. Getting your grant funded just comes down to luck. But I disagree with two parts of that, right? Of course, I disagree with the idea that it's not actually worth it to work with a grant consultant or editor on your grant. And we'll talk about that in a second. And I disagree that it comes down to just the quality of the research idea, or it comes down to luck. And all of that, I would say, is informed by my experience doing what I've been doing for the last 5-ish years, right? Number one, it doesn't just come down to luck. It does come down to how you communicate your research idea, but it does start with a high quality research idea. I'm not disputing that, right? Of course it does. But if you don't communicate that idea clearly and persuasively, that can get lost. And so, a good idea can get buried under poor grantsmanship and never see the light of day. Of course, a bad idea is never going to get very far, but a good idea, if it's not presented in a way that is clear and simple and persuasive for your readers, your reviewers, it's going to be harder to get that great idea funded. Whereas if you are able to communicate it well and clearly, that will give you a much stronger chance of getting your application funded. And of course, you can do that on your own. You can build up those skills on your own, and I highly recommend you do. I think that that is absolutely one of the core skills that you need as a researcher. If you're going to have a long and prolific career as a PI, you have to know how to write grants. But working with a grant consultant at any stage in your career can help you, either if you're just starting out and you really want to understand what it takes to write a fundable grant, that is a great time to do it. Or if you are maybe mid-career and you've hit a patch where you can't seem to get anything funded, that might be time to work with a consultant who can help you sort of clarify those ideas and how they're presented. Or even if you are more advanced in your career and you're just looking for some, assistance in the process, that is also, perfectly reasonable time to work with a grant consultant. But remember that in all of those scenarios, what you are looking for, it's really important for you to define what you are looking for, what kind of support you're actually looking for. Are you looking for support with the sort of content, the scientific merit, the approach? And if so, would working with somebody with subject matter expertise be more valuable to you? Or are you looking for someone to help you sell that idea? And remember what we talked about earlier. It's not just about, making your sentences sound pretty. It's about how the grant is organized and communicated. And so if that's the type of support that you're looking for, make sure that you are working with somebody that you can collaborate with on that and who can advise you on how to structure and present that idea in the most compelling way possible, right? So of course, I think that working with a grant consultant can be a huge benefit to your research career in terms of, potentially shortening the length of time that it takes you to go from idea to funded application, right? So you're not doing multiple resubmissions. You're able to get your grant submitted, potentially on the first try, but if not the first, then the second try, right? Because you've gotten some feedback on the scientific merit, and then you can use that to really clarify the entirety of your application and get a fundable score the next time. And of course, that's what we help our clients do, right? We work with clients who are resubmitting R01s and have that information from the peer review process. They have that summary statement in hand. Their grants were discussed, so we know that they are in the top, 50% of the submissions. And they have some good information about what needs refining in their resubmission. And based on all of that, we can take that and work with them to prepare a really, really strong resubmission that has a very high chance of getting a fundable score. So if that is interesting to you, I encourage you to check out our strategic review service. And if you would like to work with us, you can submit an application and learn more about how we work with clients. All right, see you next time.